It's been a beautiful fall. You've probably noticed that as you drive around or you're outside. The weather's been warm. The leaves, I think, have been staggered out, but that's made them last longer than usual. And one of my favorite things to do for my body and my mind is take long walks. I feel like that helps me clear my head, but also I feel better when I do it. And I've been trying to do that more. And for me, that's kind of a time to be with God, especially if I'm alone. I like to walk with other people too, but if I'm by myself, I can really think about God in that time, watch nature, like birds flying, or walk past trees and woods and think about how our faith is rooted in Him. Also watching animals and just think about His creation. Sometimes He'll bring a person to mind that I should pray for, or I'll see a neighbor or walk by their house and think I should pray for them. So that's a time for me to just be with God. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is just being with God. There's times also where I just don't do very well at just being with Him. My mind can be very full. Somebody said in something I wrote, or not that I wrote, that they wrote, that our minds can be like a swarm of mosquitoes flying in all different directions. And I can tend to be like that, thinking about way too many things. And I'm that way with God too. I'm that way with other people, probably especially my family, but also with God. In the Henry Blackaby book that we're reading, he wrote the Experiencing God book. He wrote that prayer is not a religious activity. It is a two-way interaction with the creator of the universe. So it's not a religious activity. It's a two-way interaction with the creator of the universe, with God. So I was thinking about this, and I talked to a friend in the last week, and I said, I'm concerned sometimes it becomes a religious activity for me. I just give him my list. I kind of get that done. I get my Bible reading done. And meanwhile, my mind is everywhere else but on God. I'm just making it an activity to get done. And she reassured me. She said, well, in our human relationships, sometimes we just need to get things done. Like Dale and I are married, and we might have a conversation where he decides he's going to get one of the girls, go pick them up while I make dinner. So we're just getting that done. We need to do that. You need to do that too in your job and your family. So it's okay to just sometimes give God our requests. The Bible tells us that too. We are to bring all of our requests to Him. But then there's the other side of it, of just being with Him. And like Dale and I in our relationship, if we always just got things done in our marriage relationship and never just spent time being together, our relationship would struggle over time. And there has been times in our life where we're getting it done so much that we're not focusing on that quality time together, of just being together, experiencing each other. So, in Dale's sermon 2 weeks ago, he mentioned we're going to spend some time talking about spiritual disciplines. And spiritual disciplines can be Bible reading, prayer, fasting, worship, Sabbath. There's a lot of different Bible or spiritual disciplines. And we can think of them like a garden tool or technique. You may have the best spade or hoe in the world, but that's not going to guarantee you a good crop. It's just going to assure that growth will be unobstructed for your plants. And that's kind of how spiritual disciplines are for us. They're just trying to help our faith grow, help us grow closer to God. They're a tool that we use to help our relationship with God. In Dale's message 2 weeks ago, he talked about prayer being both communication with God and communion with God. And someone 2 weeks ago mentioned, oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that way. Communion means being together, experience. It can mean on a spiritual level. I mean, we're used to communion as when we take the bread and the cup. And that is a form of being with God. But communion with him can be just being with him. He talked about how in communication with God, we speak and we listen. And probably a lot of us do struggle to listen. I know in my personal relationships, listening is something I really have to work at. I'm not always a great listener. So if you ever notice that about me, just say, hey, are you listening to me? The girls will say that. They'll question. They might have some opinions on that. So one of my favorite verses is Micah 6:8, which is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So walk humbly with your God. What does that mean? Just think about that. Sometimes I think I tend to walk with God. I know he's with me, but I'm not being too humble because I'm walking in the way I want to walk. And I think we can tend to do that. So today we're going to look at this, how to just be with him. Deuteronomy 31:8 tells us, the Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. He will be with you. In John 14:16-18, Jesus said, I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him. But you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. So in that, Jesus said, he lives in you and will be in you. The Spirit is in you. And we will not be left as orphans. We won't be left alone. So that's a pretty big deal. He's in us. So as we think about that in our prayer, there are many verses that tell us to come to him in prayer and to tell us to ask and receive. That is biblical. We're to do that. And going back to what my friend said when I asked her about was I making prayer too much of an activity, just getting it done, that's okay. And she reassured me, if we never get something done in a relationship and only have the being together part, it's kind of a balance between going to him with your requests and just spending time with him. So I'm going to talk about prayer is both communication and communion. Communion with God is the just be together part. In John 14:23, Jesus said, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our abode with him. So the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit make their abode with us. And that abode word is a different word, but it means a dwelling place or a home, a place of residence or a home. So he is making his home with us through the Spirit. He's here. He's with us all the time. So when we think about that Micah 6:8, where it said, walk humbly with your God, he's here with us. How are we walking humbly with him? And I have to question myself how often I remember that and how often I know when I'm on those long walks, I know he's there. But when I'm stressed about a situation in my home or wherever, it could be a situation here, am I remembering God's with me, walking with me through that? Am I being at home with him? There's a story I wanted to tell you about when Abby and Emma were little. So we were home together a lot. This is when they were toddlers or preschool age, and I was home with them. We spent a lot of time just being together at home. And I tended, I think, to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. Our kitchen dining room area is kind of pretty open. There's a fair amount of space in there. And so what I noticed about the girls is, this is when they were little, not now, they would want to come there to play. So if they were sitting down playing with their stuffed animals, which was a big thing they played with, they would come to the kitchen and sit there and play with them. They might want to help me with what I was doing. One time I remember our dog Bubby got dressed as a princess. He was a male dog, but he did it with a good attitude. He was a very kind soul. So we have another big thing they like to do, and you may remember this with your kids too, is build forts. And so everything we're building the fort from gets dragged to the kitchen. Kitchen chairs, couch cushions, blankets, because you got to cover the fort. And then all their stuffed animals, and it became a huge conglomeration. But they would come there and want to be wherever I was. They could have done that stuff anywhere in the house, but they wanted to be in the same area that I was at. And that's like with God. Does he want us just to be where he is working, being with him? I remember Rosemary sharing after your heart condition, I believe a number of years ago, that Rosemary could not do the things she had done before. And I think that was difficult. And she said one time that she felt like God told her to just be. And Rosemary was kind of forced into that. But does he always want us to just be with him? And do we a lot of times just make it a lot more work than that? Or do we strenuously try to work out our faith? And he wants us to simply be with him. So communion with God can be described in these ways. And this is what an author that I read wrote. They wrote in their book. Communion with God can be described as a simple gaze toward the one who loves us unshakably. It is an absorption in loving God with our whole being, not strenuously, but as a spontaneous response of the heart. I think sometimes I can make it strenuous by whatever. It could be what I'm doing here in the church or just in daily life. Communion with God is resting in him, allowing the Spirit to fill and move us as God wills. Again, the Spirit is in us. Are we letting it move us? Are we resting in him enough to even notice how it's trying to move us? And these are things I struggle with, and I don't know if you do or not, but I felt like I was to share about it today. In your bulletins, you'll find an insert. It looks like this. It's a gray insert. And I was in a study a couple weeks ago, and some people said, I don't know if I feel like I need to pray a little bit different. I need to work at my prayer life. And so these are some ideas that came. Dale and I are in a pastoral training class right now, and we are studying spiritual disciplines. And the book we're reading gave some of these ideas, but I also kind of added some other ones that might work for you. And what I would say is this: I'm going to go through some of these now and maybe give examples of a few of how it could work. But as you go home and through the week, and like Kurt said, what did you say, just to keep looking at your bulletin, or just maybe look at this and think, is there any one or two of these that would help you, that you might want to try to work at to help improve your prayer life? Because I do think it's an ebb and flow thing. Like you could have a time where your prayer life is really strong. You feel like you're really connecting with God. And then you might have a period of time where it just feels like you're just getting it done. And that's natural that it would feel that way. So the first idea on here is listen for as much time as you speak in prayer. So if you speak or give God your thoughts, even if you're not speaking audibly, and if you speak for 5 minutes, maybe then try to be quiet and listen for 5 minutes. That would be 10 minutes total. It's still not a long time, but it might be an exercise that over time can help you listen more. It's just something to try. The next thing on there is take a prayer walk or a prayer drive. I've heard some of you, at least one of you, say that they decided at one point not to turn the radio on the way to work, and then that gave them time to pray. So you know if you have a 20-minute drive to work or to Sheets in the morning, you could pray in that time. And it's just a way to clear, and it could just be sitting listening for God. You still have to pay attention to the road, but it might be a way. Something I read said that images in nature can cause us to pray for something in particular, or just allow us to feel the presence of God. And God can transform almost anything into an invitation to pray. The next thing is keep a prayer journal. Now, I have a journal. I don't necessarily call it a prayer journal, but I'm just showing it to you as an example. But writing down prayer thoughts or verses might help you over time connect with God more, but also could help you maybe see a pattern as far as how God's speaking to you. The Henry Blackaby book that we're reading, studying together, he suggested that in there. Another idea is to paraphrase a psalm. And I don't know if any of you have ever done that. I actually have done it. I never thought of it being called that. But when I'm praying for someone, so praying for someone else usually, that I do not know how to pray for them. It's just sometimes it's a very difficult situation. And I will take a psalm. A lot of times it's Psalm 23, and pray that psalm, but insert the person's name into it. And that way I can reflect while I'm doing that as far as how God's being with them. So I'm going to use Psalm 23 and just do the first few lines as if I was praying for Rick. And so I would start at verse 1. I would say, the Lord is Rick's shepherd. Rick shall not be in want. He makes Rick lie down in green pastures. He leads Rick beside quiet waters. He restores Rick's soul. He guides Rick in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And I would go through that, and that would help me just lift. And I was thinking of Rick because we really are praying for Rick here, and many are. And it's a way when we don't know how to pray, but this is God's word, we can pray that. And so that's an idea of what, and I don't know that every psalm would work that way, but there's certainly some that could really be used in that way. Another idea we got at our class was to write your own psalm. And some of you are very creative, are great creative writers. I'm not so much creative in that way. Dale would probably more naturally do this, is to think about God and just write a psalm to him. I mean, that's what David was doing in the Psalms. He was writing a song to the Lord. So I do have an example of one here. My mother-in-law sends us what she calls reflections. She has a lot of free time now, and she just likes to write. So she writes these reflections, and then we'll get them in the mail with a card. We have a whole file of them, and they're beautiful. So I was looking at this one that we just got recently, and I thought, well, that could be like kind of like a psalm. She prays a lot, reads her Bible a lot, and just reflects on her relationship with the Lord. So I'll go ahead and read a few lines from her, and this is called Who But I. Leaning down, he whispers, who but I directs your steps to a place meant just for you? Who but I stands at the gate longing for your presence? Who but I longs for your gentle spirit to worship me with a true heart? Who but I longs to continue our journey throughout eternity? I have loved you before the beginning of time, and now we start anew. Wonders you are yet to discover, leading the way. Who but I? And that's one of her ways of relating to God. She also writes many other things, but that's for her. So on this insert, there's prayer of imagination is listed there. And sometimes we think of imagination as fantasy, but imagination is just letting our mind see something that we can't visibly see. We have to use our imagination in lots of ways. We have to use our imagination when we read the Bible because we aren't actually seeing these stories go on. We're reading them and then thinking about them. So we're going to do a prayer of imagination together, an exercise. And I'm going to work through this with you and kind of show you how it can work. So I'm going to turn to Matthew 14. You don't need to. You're not to read it along with me. What I want you to do is just either close your eyes or look out the window and just reflect on what you're seeing what you're seeing about Jesus in this story. And this is a way of using your imagination just to feel the presence. See when I read the story, think about what you see in Jesus, what you notice about him. And then as you think about that, think about how it makes you feel. So I'm going to go ahead and start. You can either close your eyes or just do whatever that helps you just to kind of engage yourself in the story. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So just sit for a little bit of time and think about what you noticed about him. We'll go for about 30 seconds or so, and how it made you feel. as you go through today, maybe just recall that image you saw of Jesus and the way he made you feel. There is a website called Pray As You Go. It has an app that you can download to your phone, which I did this week. And what it has is some audios of some music with reading things from the Gospels, stories of Jesus that kind of work like that. So if it could be that could be one way you could do it, to have someone else reading it to you. On the back of the bulletin insert, there's some techniques that are more contemplative and would be considered contemplative prayer. Practicing these may help you feel more at home resting in God's presence throughout the day. They probably will be more challenging too, because it is more difficult to sit quietly with God than to be talking with him. So as we practice these, we would have to it would be kind of like wearing a new pair of shoes. It takes time to break them in. So on there is a prayer of the heart. This could be finding a short phrase like a verse or a line from a song, and just repeating that in prayer throughout the day. A common one is, Lord, have mercy. You may know of some other common ones that people pray. But they say doing that over time, the repetition can create space for the words to kind of fall away, and you just become more aware of the presence of God throughout the day. I sometimes will just say the name of Jesus throughout the day, especially if I wake up in the morning and I know I have anxious thoughts coming in my head already, which that can happen. I don't know if that happens with you, but by times I have that, and I just need to kind of say his name, and I probably could do that more. There's also a prayer of presence listed there that's about getting yourself quiet with him. There's a centering prayer which says you might find a word and then say that word and let it just get drawn into a quiet time, like maybe 20 minutes. And then at the end of these contemplative prayer times where you're sitting quietly with him, it's good to thank him for what he brought to you during that time, because he does bring things to us. And it's amazing when he does. Let me find my piece here. So when you choose a time to pray, and many of you have probably already done this, but it's important to take your personal rhythm into account. If you're a morning person, like I tend to be a morning person, it's best to pray when you are at your most awake. If you are a night owl, it might be better to pray at that time. I think we have some people that are more night owls than morning people. Or if noonday or midday is your best time, try to make that your time for prayer. Remember reading, is it Jim Elliot, Elizabeth Elliot's husband? Okay. I read his notes one time. He sent like his journal writings to his family. And this was before he was married. He said, I just think one morning to the next is too long to go between devotion times. He said, I really need to do it at noon too, because my mind just gets away from me and I just needed to go back to God. So he was saying he needed to do it several times a day. So whatever, I just encourage you to find the best time. Again, many of you have probably already done this, but it is an ebb and flow, and we do need to sometimes revisit and remind ourselves that we need to try some of these things. And again, just being with God and listening is more difficult than talking to God. Our minds will bring many distractions in. Also, you'll have external or exterior distractions. Just be patient with the distractions. Give them to God, or they may even be an opportunity for you to pray for something. Like if somebody's name keeps coming to my mind, well, maybe I'm to pray about them, not stress over how to deal with the situation, but just lift it up in prayer. So use your distractions to get closer to God. So I'll close with challenging you to experiment with some different forms of prayer. This list gives you some ideas. If you have things you want to share during the sharing time that are ideas for people, feel free to share them. And just keep a balance. I mean, I think that's our struggle, is to keep balance between thanksgiving and supplication. Supplication is asking him for what we need, but we also need to give thanks. Speaking and listening. Communication and communion. There's also confession and intercession. So I kind of gave those out of order, but it doesn't matter how you do it. God will bless whatever offering you make from the heart in and with commitment and sincerity. The more you give yourself to prayer, the more life you'll find in it. If I never went for those walks by myself, I would never have the blessings of him speaking to me that way. And there's maybe some way that you've been blessed that you could share with us too as an idea. Remember, God makes his abode, his home with you. He's already in us through his Spirit. We just need to be with him. Thank you.